Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, before we continue with this afternoon session, I'd like to encourage everyone to bring their body and mind into a state of awareness, and from within that awareness generate the intention of bodhicitta. May we gather the merit of every effort that we put in, hearing, contemplating, meditating, engaging in the path of Dharma, arise as the liberation of all mother-like sentient beings. Generating bodhicitta in this way. This afternoon I have been asked to say something about Tara, since it is in conjunction with the Tara empowerment, or the blessing empowerment that is to follow. Now, Tara practice, particularly if one is connected to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the Vajrayana Buddhist tradition, is a practice that many of you are familiar with and have been doing it, such as the Sangha of Kamasanam Karjali, KSDL here, as well as the many other Tibetan Buddhist centers that I know of, have been practicing Tara for now many years. And so when you enter into a Tibetan Buddhist traditional center, the practice of Tara and Cheresi are what is foremost entrusted to the students. Many of you have received its blessings and empowerment and teachings and transmissions. So I feel that many of you, maybe not all, but most of you have an idea of what Tara is. But on the other hand, I've often noticed also that she does tend to get a little bit stereotyped in terms of, what I've repeatedly been saying, the psychology and the cultural influence on the psychology of a human being, especially those who are spiritually inclined. There's a certain good quality in a spiritual person. People who are inclined to spirituality are known to have a very sincere heart. It's a mind that is open, it's a mind that looks at things that are good, that are virtuous, something that needs to be cultivated well. Are you having trouble hearing me?
Yes.
I think this might be better. Is that right? So as I was saying, people who are spiritually inclined often tend to have wonderful qualities. It's a very unique mind. It's a mind that is keen and eager to developing. Keen and eager. Does it work? Eager in developing good qualities. Now, the downside of it sometimes is that it gets very easily seduced in emotionality. combined together with modern societies such as the Western world. Not that the Easterners do not have emotions, I'm not saying that. But in the West, it's given so much prominence. So when the prominence of emotions and feelings and then this whole heart and the mind of the person who is spiritually inclined, we tend to inadvertently cultivate a lot of romantic notions about deities. We have to say deities because Buddhism doesn't have the concept of God. But of course, usage of different labels. But sometimes, if you look carefully, there's a border, very close borderline sort of a thing where we get close to seeing these deities as no different than gods. Tibetans have been doing that for a long period of time, so there's a very theistic approach. Although Buddhism is founded upon non-theism ideas. And if we were to go into detailed explanations about what do these deities symbolize, are they theistically seen or are they non-theistic? There is, of course, always the explanation of how deities should not be mistaken as something theistic, as something eternal, something existing, but that they are symbolic, allegorical, Muslim, that they have an essential quality that they represent that we have to identify, be introduced to, and cultivate. Nevertheless, we're talking about a very conventional approach of ordinary human beings. Because of their own hopes and fears and cultural influences, as well as the romantic ideas of what spirituality is, we often impose a conceptual idea on even what is we know intellectually to be symbolic, something that is not eternal, something that is not existent, something that is not really a conceptually formed existing deity or God. So from that perspective, historically, we also find, as I was saying, Tara has been described as many things. Tara is described as the female Buddha, mother of all the Buddhas, born of tears of compassion, consort of jealousy, the only woman Buddha who promises to be the Buddha. And for the feminists, that's always the good news. And then, on the other hand, a lot of the male teachers and the male practitioners often have, whenever they feel they are being sort of attacked about the imbalance of women's presence in Dharma, here is Tara. She'll solve the problem. This should answer your questions. So these are all the many sort of stereotyped ways of how Tara is represented. But prior to understanding or talking about Tara a little bit, it becomes necessary for us to understand what does Buddhism mean to us all. Many of us take refuge, we become Buddhists, and then, as I was saying the other day, the first niche of inspiration is very authentic, it's very genuine, it's very open-hearted. You're really searching for something that is brilliant and genuine. But over time, when the sort of the daily routine of teachings and practices are entrusted to us and we begin to engage in them, there comes about a time when the mind becomes a little bit blunt and blindly does things rather than question what you're doing. For Buddhist practitioners, that's always considered to be one of the most dangerous obstacles that you encounter. It's very dangerous because no one can argue and say you're doing something wrong. You're a very devoted student. When you sit down and devotedly, religiously do your practices, who can argue? That's not a good thing to do. But on the other hand, it does become an impediment because it is not necessary that that has the potential of transmuting or transcendence of all those defilements and of all those obscurations, and particularly if we go back to the very basic teachings of the first teachings of the Buddha, and by basic, never to mistake it for simple basic, but basic because it's the fundamental, very essence of the Dharma, the very pillar upon which the Buddhist view stands, and that is understanding the One Noble Truth. In simple words, the question is, by virtue of being a Buddhist practitioner, having teachers, being Buddhist for so many years, meditating, exerting so much effort into hearing and practicing the Dharma, how much more understanding has your mind obtained of the fundamentals of the Buddhist teachings? How much is the mind able to recognize the first noble truth of suffering? How much suffering do you actually understand? And we're not talking about just in general suffering, birth, old age, sickness, death, pain, grief, all kinds of meeting with adversities, not meeting with the positive circumstances, having to be with difficult circumstances, wishing to be free but not being able to be free. Those are all shades of gross suffering that are of course. But as a Buddhist meditator, there has to be a clear understanding that the suffering that we are talking about is the inability to be content and complete contentment, complete peace, in complete contentment, which, if we look at it as a human being, brilliant and so capable. As a species, scientifically we say humans are the most capable of the species. And that's also evident. Look at what we have created. A person who can create Microsoft, cell phones, air conditioning, cars, airplanes, all of this that is their modern inventions, the scientific inventions that they are able to today know and see. Such a capable mind should be able to find genuine happiness, genuine contentment. It shouldn't be so very difficult. And if we look at the teachings, it does say all that you need to do is learn to sit quietly and be at peace, intrinsically. And that's not a imposed, fabricated kind of contentment, but a genuine contentment. From the Mahayana's perspective, the simple question is, such a brilliant person, such a brilliant human being, with so much potential and capability and intelligence, shouldn't have difficulty in knowing happiness, wanting happiness, and being happy. Shouldn't be difficult. There's no reason why we would still have to suffer anger or hatred or jealousy, particularly when it seems to be the one thing that nobody likes, nobody wants. So the idea of suffering at some point has to be understood as the inability of a brilliant mind to using those brilliant qualities that are inherent of one's own self. And then the consequence of that is that there is anxiousness, unexplainable anxiousness. We don't know why we're anxious, but we're anxious, we're restless, we're discontent. We have everything, but we don't have anything. We surround and work our entire life to obtain that with which we can rest in peace, in contentment, and yet after a whole lifetime of searching and trying to acquire that, we still remain unsuccessful. And therefore, the Buddha says, suffering and its cause. And what is the cause? As a Buddhist practitioner, then therefore looking into oneself, is my path, my relationship to the Dharma, orienting my mind to a deeper understanding of suffering, the first noble truth that the Buddha spoke. Am I directly able to see suffering and then question, what is the cause of this suffering? And that am I, by relating to the teachers and the teachings as a Buddhist practitioner, am I able to actually find out the cause? Am I, most importantly, seeing that the causes have been said to be ignorance, ignorance of not knowing the nature of reality of self and the others? If that ignorance is the very cause, is there power in my devotion? Is there power in my faith? Is there power in my meditation? Is there power in my contemplating on the teachings? Enough power to actually begin to eradicate the ground of ignorance. In simple words, through one's connection and relation to the path of Dharma, how much more clearer am I in understanding the very truth that is being presented within the Buddhist teachings that I call the object of refuge. So therefore, is my mind understanding clearly the nature of self and the phenomena with which the self relates to? Because the Buddha's fundamental teachings talk about suffering, its cause being ignorance. But that ignorance, if it ceases, the third noble truth of cessation, that cessation can come about by engaging on the path. But somewhere along the line, if you look into one's own self, and you find that you're on the path, but the path is not necessarily bringing about the cessation of the cause of suffering, then one has to always be a little bit more careful in that perhaps you are going through a much more devotional. And here, devotional has to be understood more as blind faith, much more sense of blindly following something rather than what you are following, what you are devoted to, has the power and the brilliance of wisdom that cuts through all the ignorance and the causes of suffering and suffering itself. So as a Buddhist practitioner, knowing that the path itself must lead to, the path has to be the eradication, the cessation of ignorance. And throughout the teachings, the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, which is the very heart of the Buddhist teachings, the Buddha emphasizes the need to recognizing the nature of reality. And therefore, what we Buddhists have are only three things. We have been talking about it yesterday also. And so the Buddha says, notice the reality of impermanence, notice the reality of interdependence, notice the reality of emptiness. These are the three things. So for a Buddhist, if we say, what do you believe in? We don't have much things to believe in, other than these three facts, that the nature of phenomena and self are empty, nature of phenomena and self are interdependent, nature of self and phenomena are changing, constantly impermanent and changing in nature. And therefore here, for meditators to be able to look into oneself and see how much have you come through. And this is it's not sufficient when you say things like, I agree. We all agree everything is impermanent. We all agree everything is essentially empty in nature. It's very easy to say that. For example, even a very new person to Buddhism, understanding emptiness is intellectually is never difficult. If I pick up my glasses and say, what's the nature of glasses? Other than that, it is labeled glasses. If you look at it, it is nothing other than a composite mass of many things. So if I take out one side of this hand, what do you call this? Arm of the glasses. Then this is not a glass, it's an arm, as you say. Likewise, this is the left arm, the edge. And then the glasses, then there's the rim. There are the different parts of it. Each one of them had their own name. Collectively, we call it glass. So essentially, the teachings of emptiness is dependent upon the understanding of compositeness, of compoundedness. That the nature, ultimate nature, when you break down every particle and atom into its very minutest and sort of the basic nature, one doesn't find any fundamental existing entity other than it being naturally emptiness in nature, but accommodating emptiness, an emptiness that provides the basis for all composite factors to come together into building, and therefore things are, from the Buddhist philosophical perspective, called labeled. They are arbitrarily labeled, given designations and descriptions, but are inherently in nature emptiness. This emptiness is interdependent. It is composite. It is dependent upon many different factors. Just as to create anything, many things have to be sort of brought together. In the same way, for every phenomena, for every thought, for every feeling or emotion, internal phenomena or external phenomena, compositeness is absolutely the nature in which all things come into being. So therefore, emptiness, not so difficult to understand intellectually. Compositeness or interdependency, again, very naturally something that intelligent minds can see and change. Everything changes. That's also very evident, and therefore some amount of observation, and you will find yourselves thinking, oh yes, everything changes, everything is transitory in nature. But then here's this fact. One understands it, but doesn't believe it. Now the difference between intellectually grasping it, intellectually getting it, and not being able to have utter confidence, Such a confidence that the confidence allows you to completely break down all false habitual ways of fixating. Whether that happens or not usually is said to be the demarcation whether you're on the path or you're just a believer. So therefore, from that perspective, if you look carefully, most of us tend to be in the group of believers. We believe karma, we believe change, we believe emptiness. We don't argue with it, but it is not something that we live by. It is not something that we actually are able to confidently, with certitude, say, this is how it is, and therefore, I don't grasp to divulgence, I don't grasp to anger. Anger is just emptiness. If you can say that, ideally speaking, that would be a Buddhist practitioner. Now, when we are unable to do this, we are caught in this situation where the Buddha's profound teachings are something that we feel is our path of practice. We are devoted to it. But on the other hand, there's a sort of hesitancy with which we cannot let that manifest in the way we look at things, in the way we decide, in the way we live our lives, in the way we express our emotions and feelings and decisions. And therefore, that distance between belief and certitude, the sort of difference between the belief and the certitude, often is then the basis of different jhanas, views. And so where the view has to, when we talk about the view of Buddha Dharma, we have to talk about it from the perspective of different views. And the view always handles two things, potential and capability. We have the potential to understand the absolute view as it is. Is this our capacity now? Each one of us are responsible for answering that question. And the capacity being varied and diverse, therefore there are, as the teachings say, as many jhanas, as many views as there are individuals. Because each individual has to pace oneself according to one's own habit, according to one's own perspective of how much of that what you intellectually understand can actually be encompassed, can be cultivated, can be something that you work with. And so from that perspective, seeing this, the Buddha's teachings through the ages, and not for it's not so long time ago, 2500 is not such a long time compared to everything else that this world goes through. And I've always said, between a dinosaur and the Buddhism is fresh, very new, very, very new. Now, Tibetan Buddhism, for example, is only 1200 years. But in these 1200 years, and then the 2500 years of Indian Buddhism, remarkable, brilliant minds came up with many different marvelous, skillful means that questioned this difference between potential and capability. Because until the potential and the capability became unique, became one would not be able to benefit much from the Buddha Dharma. Then you would only be adherers of a profound teaching and not necessarily practitioners. There's a difference between the two. We believe in something and we actualize it are two different things. And then the Buddhism's main characteristic is that it is discouraging. It has to discourage belief and it encourage constantly engaging to being able to embody. And I've always felt that maybe because of that, Buddhism, no matter how profound and unquestionable, indisputable its truth is, will remain, I think, always a minority. And I've always said, yesterday we were talking about it too, is about how few we are. And the reason is, I think, and people talk about westernization of Buddhism and how it's widespread and now Buddhism is everywhere. We Buddhists become very proud of that fact. And we think a lot is happening and so forth. But we're still going to be in basements, I think, for a long period of time. Why so? It's because it will never be popular. Why so? It's because psychologically and culturally influenced, the psychology of human beings is that we are very good followers. We like to believe something, and we like to follow something. We make wonderful followers and believers, but we're very bad at being responsible. Now, Buddhism, from the very beginning, discourages believing something that you don't question yourself and blindly following something that you yourself do not actually have certitude of. And so therefore, the concept, in the beginning, of course, Buddhism is those of you who join Buddhism also will know, in the beginning it's always very exciting, wonderful lamas, wonderful teaching, absolute truth. You don't have to believe in God, and you've just shifted from one to the other. So it's all good news. But then you begin to discover, oh no, now you can't blame a God. It's all about you. It's your karma, it's your neurosis. Nobody gave it to you, nobody created it in that way. You're responsible for all your actions. If you're going to suffer, you're going to suffer because of your actions. If you're going to be liberated, you're going to be liberated not because of a Buddha, but because of your own wisdom, your own ability to recognize the absolute truth. As good as it sounds, it is as difficult to actualize it. And because we are always hesitant about fully taking on the responsibility of all our actions, I think Buddhism in these 1200 years or 2,500 years have also gradually created a whole group of believers more than those who have actualized the Dharma. And therefore when people say, why do we see so few Buddhas around today? We see very few Buddhas around today because not many of us are fully engaged in the path of the practice. We love it. We love our teachers. We love the Buddha. We have tremendous respect. We don't see how we could even hesitate to understanding the profoundness of the teachers and the teachings and their realization, but do I do it? Do I actualize in my body, speech, and mind these teachings? Do I live by a view of impermanence? In my daily life, is there any indication that my mind is certain about impermanence? Now, all you need, I always say, all you need to is go to your bathroom, for example. Go into your bathroom and then see how many different kinds of cream, toilet paper. You have enough toilet paper in the West to last you a Holocaust. Of course, they are, on the one hand, on the practical side, they are always useful. But then here we are talking about impermanence. How many t-shirts do you have? How many shoes do you have? We often look like centipedes, the number of shoes and slippers we have. But these are not necessarily really comparative to the belief of emptiness. Your own hopes and fears, when you are struggling with a sense of complete fear and sorrow or difficulty. All the teachings of impermanence, does it come into your own mind? Occasionally it does, of course. Many of you work very hard, and that's appreciated. But on the other hand, we still struggle. We still have the sense of me and yours. We still have the easy habit of saying, you're at fault, rather than seeing the interdependence of that situation. Now, when our capability still struggles in not being able to really realize its inherent potential, what do Buddhas and Bodhisattvas encounter in terms of imparting the teachings? Buddha taught in his teachings the emptiness nature, the interdependent, the truth of interdependent origination and impermanence. But then when a growing mind begins to believe in this rather than being able to have the courage to embody it, to actualize it, we find the birth and the origin of Vajrayana teachings come into being. An extension of the Mahayana teachings, because the Buddha's teachings in Mahayana primarily emphasizes the realization of the emptiness nature. But then again, we come to a point where the emptiness understanding of impermanence, interdependence, and emptiness, when it relegates itself just to the level of philosophy, rhetoric, intellectual understanding, and a personal realization of that is impeded by lack of courage of not having complete certitude of this view. Vajrayana as a skillful method was generated. And so the whole emphasis of Vajrayana practice is handling how to skillfully bring about a direct experience through which the mind that hesitates and impedes the capacity into blossoming into a full body potential. How can it actually happen? It can't happen until there is direct experience. The same direct experiences that can arise from Vajrayana practices are all possible by Mahayana practices, Hinayana and Mahayana practices, especially Shamatha and Vipassana practices. So therefore, for a person who may fully engage in Shamatha and Vipassana practices and understand the meaning of Mahayana emptiness, it's not necessary that that person engages in Vajrayana practice. That's the fact. But on the other hand, those of us who do try to do Vipassana and Shamatha and Vipassana practices, again, may sometimes struggle, which many meditators previous to ourselves have struggled. Hinayana, for example, really emphasizes the understanding of the Buddha in terms of recognizing the emptiness of self, interdependence of all of the phenomena, impermanence of internal and external phenomena, and particularly knowing that because the mind grasps to the false notion of there being something that is the basis of all confusion, and therefore relaxes in that deep samadhi of emptiness nature of the self without grasping to anything as a reality. But on the other hand, Mahayanas and the Bodhisattvayana always say, but because there is the inability to cut through the emptiness nature of phenomena, there may be some sense of suppression. And that is easily visible in many of us when we are engaged in our practices. For example, we do know the emptiness nature of one's own self, but then there's also a faint clinging to it. There's a clinging to that emptiness. In the same way, we may be seeing a sense of emptiness of the others, but there may be shades of doubt, shades of hesitation that tends to not really have the complete certitude of the emptiness of the displays. So because of that, hesitation is there. Because of that, doubt is there. Because of that, fear is there. And because of that, hope is there. Now, in order to eradicate that doubt and hesitation, what is then given within the Vajrayana skillful methods is the array of different forms of visualization. And that's why deity practices were introduced in the Buddhist teachings as an extension of the Mahayana view. In the Mahayana teachings, as it says, from the ground of emptiness arises through causes and conditions all displays of self and the others. The same logic, same philosophy is taken into Vajrayana practices, however, looking at what is it that obstructs our potential to being fully blossomed. And that happens to be because of our doubt and hesitation. And the basis of that doubt and hesitation being founded upon senses and sensorial perceptions. Particularly three things. Form is the first thing, because the visual form and the reference of the visual form is so very strong that we often tend to believe in apparentness rather than having the capacity to see the nature within the apparent phenomenal display. Second is sound and the impact of sound. That we hear the sound, we know sound doesn't exist, but we cannot not avoid being fascinated by what the sounds actually utter as. And so we tend to immediately solidify even that invisible sound. The third thing is thoughts, because it's so intimate, it's so much more intrinsic of our own selves. Therefore, for us to know you can't find thoughts. For example, when we teach emptiness from Mahayana perspective, there's always that question about where's mind, what is its color, what is its shape, and so on. And everyone knows you can't find mind, it doesn't have a shape, it doesn't have a color. But on the other hand, you can't help yourself immediately conceptualizing thoughts because you feel them, you actually experience them. Therefore, the hesitancy consistently exists upon that doubt and hesitation that you can't see, but you believe in it. You can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't touch it, but you believe it. So therefore, these three things, form, sound, and thoughts, are taken in the form of deities, mandalas, mantras, and dissolution, which are usually called creation, mantras, and the dissolution phases, which are primarily called Vajrayana practices. So now when we talk about something like Tara practice, or you can take any practice, Vajrasattva, Manjushri, Cherasi practice, any of the practices, all of the practices basically have three components. Creation is the first one, within which there are deities and mandalas. Peaceful deities, powerful deities, one deity, many deities, a rather normal-looking deity, a very fascinating sort of a deity with many heads and many ears and so on, so heads and feet and arms and so forth, those kind of deities, and mandalas, the field of not only the primary deity, but many other dakas and dakinis, bodhisattvas, many other forms of deities, retinues, and so on and so forth. Thus, the aspect called creation, they're all branched down into one category of creation. Second, and the most important aspect of Vajrayana ritual practices, deity practices, is called the sound practice, mantra practice. This comprises of not only oral recitation, but breath, training with the breath, and then what is called the mantra garland. There's always, those of you who are familiar with it, there's always a seed syllable and a garland of the mantras that's either rotating clockwise or anti-clockwise, and reflecting, visualizing upon them, and incorporating two activities, radiating lights and absorption of lights. These are the activity principles. So the sound aspect has your verbal recitation of mantras. It has the breath and the training in regulation of breath, the visualization of the seed syllable and the surrounding mantra garland that turns clockwise or anti-clockwise, and often it also incorporates the activity principle where lights radiate from it and spread in the 10 directions, or lights gather back into it, or the lights go and purify all the obscurations of sentient beings and then gathers back into it. In some cases, the light is then replaced by nectar, amrita, and droplets of showers of blessings of amrita. So these all can be bunched into what are often called mantra practices. So the generic term mantra comprises of these many different aspects in the Vajrayana teachings. The third part, the conclusion part of every Vajrayana practice of a deity, then always concludes with dissolution of whatever you have visualized. Mantras dissolve, seed syllable dissolves, deity dissolves, everything dissolves into you. So basically the structure of the practice, such as now if you take Tara practices, it will always begin. There's no Vajrayana practice that does not begin in the same way. Depending upon which teacher composed or founded a certain liturgy, word variations and compositional and poetic differences may be there. But otherwise, the theory in which, sort of the template in which it is done is always the same. All practices will begin in this way. So if I can just sort of recite that. All practices say, from the ground of emptiness, visualize everything dissolves into emptiness. From the ground of emptiness arises a seed syllable or an implement, where visualizing this upon a lotus, on a sun disk, on a moon disk, it radiates light, light absorbs into it, and upon absorption, it immediately transforms into the deity. Either the deity is yourself or the deity is in front. In the case of Tara, it's mostly always in the front. This deity then is surrounded by retinues, seated within the celestial palace, a beautiful palace, radiating all light. The entire environment changes into the mandala of deities At the heart of the deity is a seed syllable. In the case of Tara, it is drum syllable, surrounded by the mantra, which rotates clockwise or anti-clockwise, radiating light. Do 1,000,000 mantras while resting within this visualization. That your mind is the seed syllable, radiating light. Rest there, rest there, rest there. You accumulate the mantras. At the end of it, all of the lights gather into the deity. The deity dissolves into the seed syllable. The seed syllable dissolves into the ground of emptiness. Your mind and the deity becomes inseparable, and you rest within that. Now, when you rest within that sense of complete expansiveness, when you rest within that complete, here, look at it. When you rest within that complete ground of emptiness, here is the moment where the meditator begins to, if you're doing the Vajrayana practices correctly, you are looking at a sense of. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Are you all right there?
Yes, I am. I'm just listening.
Very good. You're listening far better than most of us.
I need to listen. I need more blessings.
Very good. Are you comfortable there?
Yeah, I'm in trouble. I'm in good.
Good. So the whole essence of it is from now when you began. Where you began was from the ground of emptiness, everything arose. As a seed syllable, then that turned into the deity, the yourself in front of you. The entire mandala is visualized. Then the whole mantra section is where you can hold this whole field, the whole mandala, all of the deities, all of the Buddhas, all of the Bodhisattvas, mantra rotating, benefiting sentient beings by purifying their obscurations with the light that is radiating from you or from the deity. And through that hundreds and thousands of accumulations of the mantra where your mind is resting within that, the conclusion is again, everything dissolves into this seed syllable. That itself dissolves into emptiness, which is nothing other than the nature of your mind. Now imagine when you do this 1,000,000 times or 100,000 times. I'm only joking, there's a hope from all of those great masters who came up with this skillful means, that at a certain juncture you would realize to keep this as a parallel example of the world that you have created as well. Therefore, if you another example is to say, for example, 10, 15, 20 years ago, before you became a Buddhist, how many of you knew about Tara, the way she is? But then, over years, you have been introduced to her. So you got a picture of her, you got a text of her, you were told she's the female liberator, she's the deity, the white Tara is the deity of longevity, of immortality, and therefore, slowly you begin to have an affinity towards the deity itself. Now today, when you walk outside, and then somebody argues with you that Tara is actually, let's say, a demon, you immediately become very, very hurt by that. And you will stop everything that you are doing to make sure that the person is corrected. How Tara is wonderful. How Tara is the best. How without Tara there would not even be the possibility for sentient beings to be liberated. You would defend Tara. Now that's about just one concept with which you have had a relation for only a number of years, and some even less. But with every other conceptual idea, you've had a relationship that's over lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes. And therefore the Vajrayana's way of pointing out is, given time, how everything that is inherently empty does become so very dualistic, so very real, so very existent, that you fall in love with it, that you associate it with happiness, or you associate it with unhappiness. Vajrayana's method of deity practice is to consistently understand with a direct experience of engaging in how everything arises from emptiness. But here it is different from the Mahayana, Madhyamika particular approach of intellectually knowing this. It is directly experiencing how indeed from the ground of emptiness, how your mind creates the syllable, how it can multiply, the multiplicity of what is called mandala principle. Just as this deity, the celestial palace, radiating light, hundreds of deities, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, performing all kinds of activities, if you open your eyes, this is a mandala. It is just a square as it is. It has as many doors as it is. It has as many beings as it is. It has as many activities as it is. And therefore, mandala principle becomes the earth, the universe, the cosmology. Whatever is the basis upon which all arises, manifests, and ceases is called the mandala practice. If you have a single thought, your mandala is as big as that thought. If you have a bigger thought, your mandala is as big as your perspective. If your perspective expands to just holding Canada in your mind, Canada becomes the mandala. If it goes into Northern America, yes, the whole of North America becomes the mandala. If you expand your mind to holding in your mind at this moment planet Earth, the planet Earth becomes the mandala. And everything else, as vast as is your mind, the sphere of it is the mandala. Within the sphere, just as you deliberately hold a deity, you hold yourself. But in the same way, the deity practices allows you to understand that just as from the ground of emptiness, everything is created, manifests, and within this ground of emptiness, everything dissolves. Direct experience, with the direct experience of this practice, meditator then begins to have the taste of what the Mayan teachings speak about. Indeed, happiness, suffering, good things, bad things, your things, my things, this, that, many, one. Everything arises from the ground of emptiness of one's own mind, manifests within that one's own mind, dissolves into that one singular, one's own essential empty nature of mind. That is then the main purpose of every deity practice. That's why Idam practice, primary deity practices, became very important in the Vajrayana tradition. It is almost a field work in the normal work when you sort of study medicine, for example, and then after studying medicine, you get your degree, you actually go and do an internship where you have the direct experience, the field work of actually directly experiencing what you have studied. Likewise, almost in the same way, Vajrayana practice is going beyond intellectual rhetorics of what profound view that you are holding to actualize that so that your capacity is supported with the certitude of the view, that the certainty of the view arises. And therefore in Vajrayana, we use a lot the term one taste, or directly tasting it. So you taste experientially the philosophy of emptiness, the philosophy of interdependent origination, philosophy of impermanence, and therefore viewing in the same way as you did within the creation, mantra, and the completion practices, one's perspective of everything else also is encompassed within that realization. So therefore, Vajrayana are the most wonderful, skillful ways, methods that are prescribed by the great realized beings that allows ordinary people's capacity, capability of this current mode to change into the fullest potential, where you begin to realize intrinsically the mind is essentially awakened, but that it is so obscured by its own doubts and hesitations. Not intentionally, but because it is so subsumed in the seduction of references. References where it views forms as reality, and not able to see the nature is driven and distracted by the apparentness of the forms. In the same way, the sound, the impact of the apparentness of the sound completely obscures the ability to see the nature of the sound. Sees and feels the emotions and the thoughts, but rather than being able to see the natural nature of thoughts and emotions, it is so driven and distracted by the apparentness of the thoughts. And therefore, when the apparent obscures the nature, then duality is born out of Where duality is born, it's very easy to like and dislike. Karma, cause and effect, is inevitable after that. Therefore, in order, suffering arises from that karma. Karma created because of ignorance, of not knowing the nature, being driven and distracted by the apparentness. Therefore, how can cessation come? Therefore, path is to directly have the confidence so that the cessation is realized, uprooting the ignorance through which there would be a complete eradication of that suffering of self and all sentient beings. So with that intention, the Yidam practices, as I was saying, deity practices, became very integral to the Vajrayana practices. Now, of course, you have to look at it in the perspective of also why so much hundreds and thousands, the numbers became so prevalent, especially around the 10th and the 11th centuries. It seems that the emphasis in numbers began to be much more marked within the Vajrayana tradition. And doing 100,000 of mantras or 1 million of mantras and so forth is not for any other reason other than to give you that many moments to directly experience this. So when you say 1 million para mantras, you're not getting into the good books of someone because you've clocked in a number of hours or a number of mantras. What you have to look at is, what you mean is, you have given yourself 1 million moments to realize, directly experience the absolute nature of emptiness as the Buddha taught. Now, would you say 1 million is sufficient for you to gain some amount of certitude, where the mind, after 1 million times of resting within this exercise of knowing everything is projected from mind, rests in mind, dissolves into mind, essentially this mind is also empty in nature, would 1 million times directly experiencing this be sufficient for you to believe in it, or not? If not, another deity practice is given to you for another round of 1 million times. But then on the other hand, it may be also possible that for some, 100, or even 10, or even 7, or even 1 time of knowing, reciting this would be enough to dissolve lifetimes and lifetimes of rigid hesitation and doubt that is unable to really cross beyond its own existing capacity into blossoming as the full potential of the awakened ones. And therefore, depending, the question that many people ask, why are so many numbers given? Numbers are always and should always be given in correspondence to how stubbornly you will resist. Despite the truth that you face each day in your own practice, how much stubbornness is there? As long as the rigidity of that doubt and hesitation that sees it but doesn't believe it, doesn't have the certitude and the confidence in it, you will need to recite mantras, you will need to recite and do the practices of many deities. And therefore, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we do receive a lot of empowerments, we do receive a lot of teachings, we do receive and take on a lot of different commitments. And it is not for any other reason, but as a mark of humility in knowing that you will need all of these practices to get rid of, to soften that rigidity, the stubbornness that tends to be so persuaded by the apparent that you completely are oblivious of the natural nature of the deities. Now, in that regard, all deity practices should be taken. So then, speaking of Tara, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, Tara is one of the very foremost practices that we all try to accomplish. And in Tibet especially, Chenrezig and Tara are the two male and female deities who are considered to be the very primary deities. Now, at the same time, a very significant characteristic of all deities are also slightly placed in 3 levels, many levels, but we can generalize it in 3 levels. 3 levels based upon 3 perspectives. just to use simple words, perspectives. How much, the simple perspective would be is, how much confidence do you have of your own basic nature being primordially enlightened, that the basic nature is absolutely true nature of emptiness, is intrinsic of God's own self. Now, we have been sort of talking generally about it, but if you look back into, again, see subtle differences that may be there. For some of us, the hesitation and the stubbornness may be so strong, but because the stubbornness and the hesitation of not being able to see the nature and being driven by the apparent phenomena is so very strong, because of that rigidity of the stubbornness, we will have the consequence of hope and fear. The hope and fear will be just as strong. So it's almost sort of automatically there. Now, when the mind is a little bit of a middling capacity, we say, when there is a sense of rigidly being persuaded by the apparentness, lack of understanding of the nature, but because you are working with it, there may be a sense of some amount of confidence, and therefore you are driven by the apparentness, but you're also able to let go of it with some amount of reflection, mindfulness, awareness, and so on and so forth. So it's almost like a person practicing patience. You know, you could be not patient, or you could be patient after you've gotten angry, or then you could be just spontaneously patient. So this would be a lesser capacity, middling capacity, and a higher capacity. So in the same kind of an example, there are also the middling capacities where your rigidity is there, but it can be taught. It can be actually worked with. You can remind itself with some amount of reflection and analysis and mindfulness and awareness, and therefore suffers from hope and fear. But it is a soluble hope and fear. It can be solved. It is sort of rather pliable in that it can soften after some time. Then there's, of course, the very highest capacity where the understanding is so much more clearer and acute that the hope and fear has less chances of resting and consolidating its grip over one's own basic sanity. Now, based upon how much or how little you struggle with the hope and fear also depends the relationship you have with deities. So therefore, one good way to look at it is, how do you relate to deities yourself? And of course, from a more idealistic perspective, all of us would like to believe that we work with the deity from the perspective of what I told you just now, a little bit earlier, that all deities are projections of your own mind, symbolizing the very wisdom quality of your own intrinsic self, that they are symbolic of knowing what is creation, what is manifestation, what is the dissolution stages of every phenomena, and therefore they are to be methodical. They are skillful methods that teach you and directly allow you to experience emptiness. Now, ideally, that's how it is. But on the other hand, while you are doing these practices, there comes a time when you are struck by, let's say, some sickness. And immediately, the person you will find very often is that person who is doing a lot of creation and deity practices of creation and completion will still immediately question, which deity should I practice so that my medicines work better? And that's when you go looking for medicine Buddha practices, which you think Manjushri can't help you with, or Charity cannot help you with. Now, supposing you are thinking about some kind of, you've met with an accident, or you're in the hospital, or someone you love is in the hospital, and you wish the person to live long. Everybody goes through Amitabha's practices or Vaikara practices, and therefore deities get labeled. Deity in the department of long life, deity in the department of wisdom, deity in the department of compassion. We begin to get ideas of, as if Charity has no wisdom, it's all Manjushri. Therefore, if Manjushri doesn't, however, give long life, you've got to go to Amitabha's. If it's a wrathful problem, then these are peaceful deities. You should go to more the Yamantaka, the Vajrakilala, and the Kudrapa, and so on and so forth. So now, how does this happen? All of these differences happen because of hope and fear. It's the play of hope and fear. Ultimately, deity and you are the only ones relating to one another. And therefore, each one of us have to question within our own selves, how do I look at a deity? And it would be very harmful for your own practice to then blindly do what everybody else is doing. Everybody practices Tara, so therefore everybody practices Tara. Yes, of course, there's always a general environment where we can do this. But on the other hand, you have to look into your own mind to begin to say, how do you relate to the deity itself? Do you have the sense that the deity is your own primordial nature? Is that confidence there? And you have to be able to go beyond an ideal, sort of an ideal way of looking at it. Now, the idyllic way of looking at it is, yes, of course, I see the deity as my own primordial nature. But imagine yourself in a situation where you're very afraid of something. Would this deity still enable you to have the confidence of dealing with that problem because you know that problem to be also a projection of your own mind? Or is your mind, and you have to be very honest at that time, or at that time, does your mind suffer so much that it could, as KhandroRinpoche says, if you throw a person into the water, if you throw a person who doesn't know how to swim into the water, this person may have learned his whole life that you can't hold on to water. But what happens is when you push this person into the water, the first reflexive sort of the impulse that this person has is to try and grab the water because he thinks that maybe, in his case, something will work. Our hopes and fears are quite something like this at many times, is that we know essentially everything to be empty in nature, but maybe this deity can help me solve this problem. When that kind of a strong fear, open fear is what you are looking at, it becomes very important at that moment to understand that perhaps that is the more real relationship you have with the deities than the idyllic thought, which is the potential. So therefore you see the difference between potentially knowing it to be the nature, everything to be the nature of your own mind, but then the reality of your current capacity is that you still are in need of help. You still would like someone to help you, someone to protect. You still need refuge. You still need to have long life, good health, marry well, prosperity. All of those things are still something that does matter to you. And it is extremely important that meditators be very honest with that approach. To lie about your own capacity is to push a problem into, it's a denial. It's what in the West we call it. It's about a denial which doesn't help one at all. Now, when that discovery of how much your mind still struggles with hope and fear arises, then you can walk on the path of the deity practices much more quickly. So there are the three categories. Seeing the deity as the sovereign refuge, into whom you take refuge, you seek protection, blessings, and accumulate merit and purify. That's the first category of deities. Particularly for meditators who have strong struggles with hope and fear. The day you really come face to face, being honest with how much you struggle with hope and fear, you have to learn to relate to deities as object of refuge. It is much more helpful there than to that prematurely at the time to try and imagine everything is the nature of mind, because it comes down to you're sick. Would you like to rest in the nature of emptiness, or would you like to recover? If you're facing death, would you like to live a little bit longer, or would you like to know impermanence, realize impermanence? Now, the distinction between capacity and potential, therefore seeing one needs to then engage in the right deity practice is what we are saying. And the right deity practice, if the hope and fear is very strong, you still need help. Therefore, Tara practices, Cheresi practices, especially Tara practices, are much more within the outer Tantra practices. Those of you who are familiar, Kriya, Karya, Yoga Tantra practices are what we're talking about. I don't want to use too much traditional terms, sort of keeping in mind it's a general public event. And so therefore, Tara practices, the outer Tantra practices, are where deities are object of refuge. And that's why Tara, for example, is very much associated with obtaining protection from fear and long life, particularly these two qualities. Now, of course, of the various 21 manifestations of Tara that are there are Tara with various enlightened activities. There's the Tara of enlightened activities, Tara of compassion, Tara of magnetizing qualities, Tara who subjugates or tames the maras and the difficult beings, Tara who bestows power, Tara who transmutes aggression, Tara who fulfills all wishes, various 21 different kinds of activities that are associated with what is generally known as the 21 Tara practices. But all of the 21 Taras can be brought down into the two principal deities, which are green Tara and the white Tara. Even these two can be embodied within the single Yidam deity, which is much more within the inner Tantra perspective, the Anatara Tantra perspective, which would be then the green Tara practices. But prevalent to many of our Tibetan Buddhist tradition practices, white Tara and green Tara are the two main Tara practices. And a certain sort of a quality of their activity as bodhisattvas are given, where green Tara is often associated not only as a Yidam primary deity, but also as someone who gives protection from fear, particularly the 8 kinds of fear. White Tara is one among the Saranamsu, as we say, the 3 principal deities of long life practices, longevity practices, Anjalma, Sabakne, and Doma, or Tara, Amitayus, and the Ushnisha Vijaya practices. White Tara practices, particularly here, because we were talking about the potential, is then said to be an object of refuge. And is Tara existent as a real deity who can bestow long life? Yes. The answer is yes. Answer is that ultimately all deities are not out there, it's your own primordial nature. Agreed. But in that case, the sickness and the long life and the happiness that you pursue must also be seen in the same light as being in the natural nature of your own mind. You can't say something like, some things are real and some things are just a projection of my mind. Deities are the projection of my mind, but my sickness is real. So long as that is real, everything is real. So long as that is emptiness, everything is emptiness. The day when the absolute realization of birth, old age, sickness, death, hope, fear, praise, blame, happiness, suffering, significance and insignificance, all of the worldly dharmas, truly your view can see it as nothing other than the projection of my own mind. There is no dharma other than your own mind. There is no Buddha other than your own mind. There is no deity other than your own mind. They are truly nothing other than projections, manifestations of your own brilliant Buddha mind. But because we know this to be true, but the capacity is, I'm still suffering. My shoes are still tight. The air condition is still too strong. There's a person who's here, there's a person who's there, somebody's coming in, somebody's going out, and the reality of all this is there, then you have to be very honest that the approach requires you to still have a sense of refuge, have a sense of blessing, have a sense of an object through which you can acquire merit, through which you can obtain purifications of different obscurations. Therefore, from that perspective, Tara is always seen as a sovereign, as a refuge. Then in the case of those of the middling capacity, when you're able to get a little bit understanding of the deity and your own mind not being separate, then you cultivate those practices where the deity is visualized in front and you yourself also visualize yourself as a deity. That's usually the juncture between Yoga Tantra practices and my yoga practices. Then ultimately through these practices, these are all progressive. When you go through really taking refuge into the deities, progressively your mind begins to understand that the deity and you are inseparable. And therefore, when the highest capacity through abhishekas, empowerments and transmissions and the instructions of the teachings, your mind matures, there comes a time when you really say, oh, the deity is really not out there. My mind is the deity itself. That is where you then progress into the higher inner tantras, particularly the Maha and the Adi Yoga tantras, where then you arise yourself as the deities. Now, why I'm mentioning this is because different levels of practices of the deities are described in accordance to these practices. Tara practices are often done very devotionally. With Tara in the front, you seek her blessings, you obtain merit, longevity, freedom from fears and so forth from her. And that's not because she's out there, but it's much more because you need it. It's much more because your capacity still suffers from not being able to really have fearlessness arising intrinsically, from that immortality not being arisen intrinsically of one's own self. Until then, you're still reliant upon an object of refuge. Higher Tantra practices, and many of you do the practices, such as Vajrayogini and Dorsen and so forth. These are all of the practices where the pride, where the confidence of the practitioner itself is such that you begin to actually see long life doesn't have to be sought somewhere else. It is intrinsic of one's own self. That freedom from fear doesn't have to be searched somewhere else. All you need to know is to strengthen your own mind's understanding of the natural nature of emptiness, which is the sphere from where all hopes and fears, where obtainings and losses all arises as the natural display of one's own mind. And so, therefore, those practices are much more the primary Idam deity practices, and the distinction between the two should be understood. Now, in lieu of that, the empowerment, the softening that is going to be done is very much from the outer Tantra perspective. It is a long life practice because, like Tara, is considered to be long life. So, just sort of a brief kind of a explanation, if I could do, about the text itself, the empowerment text itself. The perspective, the view with which you go is with humility. Knowing hope and fear to be still very significant in our lives. Struggling with hope and fear, wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. Still knowing the difference and feeling the difference of being significant versus the insignificance and the pain and the hurt that we experience when we don't matter to somebody, when the insignificance is there. So the duality of significance and the insignificance we suffer from, the duality of praise and blame, that still is very marked in how we perceive things. The duality and the separation we make of hope and fear, of happiness and suffering, of obtaining something and losing something. When the duality of these 8 worldly dharmas still very much is what I am working with, which still has an impact on my own self, may I invoke then the blessings of all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas who manifest in manifold ways, one of which is the Tara. And in that case, the Tara, because of your duality, because the mind still has the duality, therefore the significance of duality, deity and you, are also dual. There are also 2 different things. Since the duality of hope and fear is what you are working with, you do create a world of duality. And within that world of duality, you have Bodhisattvas, Buddhas, who manifest for the benefit of sentient beings. Therefore, in that regard, where the world of duality is what you are working with, then the creation of all those, you have to give immense freedom to other sentient beings who are superior to you in intent and in activity, in their realization, who with their own oath and commitment return again and again to benefit all sentient beings. But you have to, I hope this is kind of clear, that there is no contradiction to the 2 of them. That there is 2 things, and yet it is not 2 things, it's not in contradiction, it's just about your perspective, how you're looking at things. So since the duality is what we are working with, and therefore knowing the essential nature to being one, there being no separation, yet because of my duality, I supplicate to all those manifesting Buddhas and Bodhisattvas gathered in the form of white Tara. And so, particularly, this form of white Tara is said to be so imbued with the blessings and the commitment of all the bodhisattvas who manifest particularly to purify obstacles to the life of sentient beings, and therefore invoking their blessings in the form of the female Buddha, Aryatara, white in color. Many of you know how to visualize her. Seated on a lotus upon a moon disk is the white Tara in a Vajra lotus posture. Her right hand extended in the posture of generosity, the left hand holding at the heart, her index and her thumb both holding the stamen of a flower, white flower, lotus, that are of three kinds. A very small flower with a seed that is quite big in it, a bud and a fully blossomed upala or a lotus flower that rises and blossoms above her left ear. Aryatara is visualized in this form. But then the visualized form has to be understood as being symbolic. Immediately that you visualize a deity, you have to have a sense of what each form means. It's not about creating just a beautiful lady out there. And unfortunately, I think these days a lot of the tendencies happen where people tend to humanize deity pictures. And of course, if you do it with all good intention, as an artist, you paint pictures of the deities of different kinds. That's an expression of your love. That's an expression of your wishing to express the quality of the deity. So I guess from the form of art, common art, it's acceptable. But as a Buddhist art, it is not acceptable. Because Buddhist art does not allow human emotions to be evoked in the picture of a deity, the form of a deity. And therefore, when people make Tara with many years of, I received recently a very beautiful card, and I don't mean to not appreciate that fact because I'm sure it came out with so much love. But Tara, who sort of was made to look like my face, with tears coming down in the shape of heart. You know, all tears in the shape of heart. Now that's, as I said, as an expression of love, that's very nice. But it defeats the whole purpose of what Tara is at that time. Because Tara is to transcend that. When you look at Tara, you shouldn't see a crying woman. You shouldn't see it dramatically, any kind of neurosis should not be projected upon the form of the deity. That's very important to understand. And these days the danger is that instead of oneself going beyond duality, everyone's trying to bring all that what is non-dual to the level of humanizing. And that's, I think some people call it humanizing Dharma. That defeats the whole purpose of Dharma completely. Dharma is supposed to get us out of this. We're bringing everything pure to the level of our level and then calling it being honest, humanizing it, down to earth Buddhism, whatever different kinds of things that are there. This is a very dangerous thing that is happening, and it has much more to do with sensorial sort of love and gratification rather than going beyond, transcending and transmuting one's own neurosis and duality. Anyway, therefore, in order not to do this, the moment you see the form of the deity, such as in the case of Tara, this is how one should be doing it. When you see her form, and in the text it says, when you see the whiteness of her color, and that's where there's never a question of is deity man, is the Tara man or a woman. And as I said in the very beginning, she's stereotyped. It would be very wrong to refer to any deity with a gender and saying he or she. Of course, colloquially, there's always some form of he and she that we do use. But from a practitioner's perspective, here is somebody who epitomizes, because it is in the form representing white in color, simply meaning selfless purity. So when you see the white form of Tara, mistake will be if you see a beautiful, young, white woman. Rather than that, the perspective of a Tantra practitioner, Vajrayana practitioner, inherent selfless purity, your own nature, Tara is just a mirror reflecting your own nature. In the same way, one face of the Tara symbolizes one taste, the unique taste of emptiness, serene, peaceful emptiness, vast expanse. Resting within that is her one peaceful face. And therefore, immediately when you see the single face of Tara, mind must evoke immediately, like a mirror reflecting your own reflection. Mind must immediately reflect a sense of, oh yes, within that selfless purity, the unique one taste of emptiness. Her right hand in the gesture of generosity is immediately should be seen as evoking the quality of generous mind. Since the nature is selfless, and it imbues within us a single taste, one taste, generosity is just the natural activity that you have, and therefore her gesture of giving generosity, extended hand outward, simply symbolizes the ability, the potential natural generosity that you hold, which arises from the single taste of emptiness and primordial selfless purity inherent of one's own self. Her left hand, as I said, holding the stamen of the lotus in her thumb and the index fingers. In the text is holding the stamen of Utpala, of 3 flowers of various stages of growth. The first, which is this small flower, and some artists these days don't seem to make it, but the real, sort of the actual depiction of Tara should consist of these 3 flowers. First is a small flower with a seed in it, a sizable big seed in it, representing Buddha Kashyap, the Buddha of the past. Then in the middle is the fully blossomed lotus that represents Buddha Shakyamuni, Buddha of this present era. Then there is a bud on the far side, which then represents Buddha Maitreya, Buddha of the future. Stem of that is held between your index and your thumb. The index and the thumb finger holds the nerves of one's own heart, the heart connection from your index finger especially, and the thumb connects both of these 2 fingers. In some of the descriptions refer to the 2 truth. But then some describe also it as holding the direct vein or the nerve to one's own heart center. Therefore, your heart, your mind, holds the Buddhas of the 3 times. Kashyap is your mind, Shakyamuni is your mind, Maitreya is your own mind. The essence of the Buddha and the teachings of the 3 times of these Buddhas of the past, present, and future are not out there. It's intrinsic to yourself. Your heart, your mind contains the essence of the teachings of all the Buddhas of the past, present, and the future. Therefore, knowing this, a sense of knowing, my mind, Buddhism is not out there. Buddhism is within me. Buddha's Dharma is not to be revered somewhere out there. It is within my own mind. If you revere and respect and are devoted to the truth hidden into your own mind, which the Buddha of the past, present, and the future propagated and taught, this is then to be realized within one's own self. That should be immediately evoked in one's own mind. Then this Tara is endowed, white Tara especially, has 7 eyes that are on her figure. The 2 eyes, the central forehead has what is called the 3rd eye. On both her palms and both her soles are also 2 eyes, and depicting as the 7 eyes adorning Tara or white Tara. The 2 eyes represent, when you look at the 2 eyes of Tara, one should immediately have a sense of it symbolizing clearly seeing duality. Being able to see duality, just as you are able to see duality, Tara's ability to clearly see the nature of duality. Single eye in the center of her forehead represents the unity of the two truths. The relative and the ultimate truth are indivisible in nature, therefore, in the center of her forehead is represented with that eye, representing unity of relative and ultimate nature. The two eyes on her palm and the two eyes on the sole of her feet represent or symbolizes all actions governed by compassion and wisdom. The two kinds of bodhicitta and the wisdom of seeing things as they are and knowing its own nature, the two wisdoms. The apparent wisdom of seeing what is apparent and the wisdom of seeing the nature of what is apparent. And therefore, seven eyes, when you look at Tara, immediately there should be a sense of, oh yes, duality, ultimate is singular in the nature of the unity of the two truths. Nevertheless, within that realization of the absolute unity of the two truths, that wisdom and compassion is the means that should govern all actions of your body, speech, and mind. With wisdom and with compassion, one must benefit all sentient beings. Now take a look, when you're looking at Tara, the moment you visualize Tara, if your mind is able to just think of these qualities, if your mind is able to think of primordial selfless purity, if it's able to think of ultimate nature, the unique one taste of the ultimate nature, of how that therefore allows yourself to be the basis of all generosity, that the Buddha and the essence of the Buddha of the three times rests within your own heart. Duality, its nature understood, all activities engaged in with wisdom and compassion. What kind of a person would that make you if you were able to remain embodying these qualities? Blessings and merit don't just become sort of thrown down from the empty sky in the Buddhist tradition. May I receive blessings, may I get the merit, may obstacles be purified. We have obstacles because we are still very much living within the mundane world. The influence of karma, our own merits, lack of merit, often influences our lives, and we have difficulties. We face difficulties, obstacles to life, to our material wealth, to not having our wishes fulfilled, or encountering various difficult situations. But then, if these are all influenced by the karma, then one of the wonderful qualities of the karma is that it can always change. What can be built can be disintegrated. What has been caused can be exhausted. And therefore, however, the exhaustion rests upon one's own self. Merit comes from Tara. What does it mean? Does she open the blue skies and drop down, as many of us would like to believe, that she suddenly changes the course of one's own karma? There are lots of powers and blessings in the Bodhisattvas, and as long as we are in the relative conditional world, this could also be a condition. Blessings can also be a condition. But on the other hand, merit arises in this realization. Karma has to change, we say, from adversity to blessings. That means karma has to change. But for karma to change, it has to also have the potential of changing from an ignorant state into a wisdom state. Whenever the mind shifts from not knowing to clarity, from ignorance to purity, to wisdom, it is within that shifting itself that you are evoking the transformation, you're evoking the transmutation. Blessings happen in that particular way. Has Tara been responsible? Yes, of course, because she has been the means through which that change has occurred. But on the other hand, that means independently cannot do anything until your mind supports the means, becomes the basis for the means to bringing about that transformation within one's own self. Therefore here, Tara's body itself, it says, when one says the female, youthful, beautiful body of the Tara, in the Tara Tantra, what does it mean? Female, youthful, beautiful body of the Tara. That female, youthful, beautiful is supposed to be coming out from 9 qualities. which are usually called subtle body, perfect proportion, well-toned body, pliant body, youthful body, clear body, radiant body, attractive and beautiful, and sheer splendor, which is usually called Ziji, magnetizing. Generally, these are all brought down to the beautiful Tara, the youthful, beautiful Tara that she is manifesting in the female form. But what do these 9 characteristics of what we call beautiful and youthful and feminine are said to be in the Tara Tantra in this way? Purified from all prides. Subtle body symbolizes pride, completely exhausted. Perfect proportion symbolizes hatred, completely purified. Well-toned body symbolizes desire, completely purified. Pliant body symbolizes ignorance, completely purified. Youthful body symbolizes jealousy, completely purified. Clear body symbolizes all stains of duality, purified. Radiant body means one is endowed with all excellent selfless qualities. Beautiful and attractive simply means perfection of the absolute truth. Sheer splendor or Ziji, magnificent, simply symbolizes victory over all obscurations and habitual patterns. That's what is a female, beautiful, youthful body. Now if someone says that's a woman, then good. We take it as a compliment. But on the other hand, it has to be understood. Vajrayana is about that, is that you take a means to open the door to who you are. Just as the whole Vajrayana practice is about training the mind to see the nature, therefore in the same way, that nature is seen when you are able to take the means of just a form of a deity, and the deity's visualized form and the practice itself opens the door to seeing who you are naturally. These are qualities not out there. These are qualities you are endowed with. When you are able to stabilize and be more confident of that quality, that is called blessings. That is called awakening. That is called merit. There is no powerful merit, realization, awakening, or blessings than to be able to generate that. Even if we imagine that Tara or the Buddha himself could come here, knock on your door and check your address and say, you, Mary, Jane, or George, or Edward, or whoever you are, I today pronounce you realized. What do you think exactly will happen to you? You're not going to turn immediately to a kind of Wizard of Oz kind of thing. What you will probably have is pride purified, hatred purified, desire purified, ignorance purified, jealousy purified, free from duality and habitual obscurations, radiant and perfected in all good qualities, selflessly kind, naturally at ease. That's what you'll become. Now, whether the Buddha came knocking to your door and gave you that, or you were able to sit down and recognize it, what's the difference? Therefore, merit can be that way, and the merit can be spontaneously arisen within one's own self, and that spontaneously arising is called sadhana, accomplishment, practices. In the same way, the Tantra says, just as beautiful as Tara is adorned with these 9 qualities, she also is adorned with the 13. She's the Sambhogakaya deity, adorned with the Sambhogakaya ornaments, the 5 silken garments, the shawl, the vest she wears, the diadems from her crown, the sash she wears, and the lower garment that she wears are the 5 silken ornaments or the adornments, the clothing of the Sambhogakaya deity. Immediately, when you see the Tara adorned in the silken garments, the mind should immediately understand these 5 silken garments symbolizes victory over 5 defilements, non-aggression, free from desire, free from ignorance, free from jealousy, free from arrogance. That's what they symbolize. In the same way, she wears a necklace the necklace immediately, in all deities, immediately represents, the necklace that is chestnut symbolizes mindfulness. Crown that she wears symbolizes discriminating awareness. Bracelet represents diligence. Earrings represent patience. Anklets represent concentration. The short necklace of the choker represents equanimity. The longer flower garland or the longer necklace that she wears that's to the navel level represents joyfulness. Jewelry and adornment of a deity is not just jiggling, jangling ornaments. It is about these qualities of a deity. And therefore, Tara is intrinsic of yourself. Mindfulness is not out there, it's within you. Discriminating awareness is not out there, it's within you. Diligence is not out there, it's within you. Patience is not out there, it's within you. Concentration is not to be found somewhere else, it's within you. Equanimity is not there, it's intrinsic of oneself. Joyfulness cannot be found anywhere but within one's own self. When you discover these intrinsic qualities and you adorn yourself with it, then you become Tara herself. That's what accomplishing Tara. Therefore, thinking about all these qualities, that's what is called visualizing a deity. Visualizing a deity is not just superimposing a deity out there or theatrically yourself arising as a deity. That's not what is creation of a deity or visualization of a deity. Visualization of deity forms is just a simple means. It's like, I always say, when you enter into a room and you flick a switch on and the light illuminates, the switch is just a trigger that illuminates the whole room. In the same way, forms of deities is just a trigger that illuminates your mind to the intrinsic Buddha qualities that are within your own self. When you steadfastly remain within it, allow yourself to understand the qualities that are inherent of one's own self, and steadily you begin to understand the qualities not out there, but within your own self. Your natural capacity to not be inseparable from the deity begins to mature. And that is called completion. And when that confidence arises, then there is no amount of intellectual rhetoric that you are dependent upon to gain utter confidence and complete certitude of the view. In order to be able to do this, therefore, one begins by first giving the abhishekas, the empowerments, the transmissions, the oral transmissions and the teachings, the commentaries, and then set with that permission, you are then going to accomplish the practices. So therefore, to the question these days, many people say, I will take the empowerment, but do I have to do the practice? I'll leave that question up to people for them to decide themselves. There are many people who are spontaneously enlightened. We can never deny that fact. And that is also possible. On the other hand, on a much more sort of a simpler perspective, any one practice carries the same meaning. That's also what I did want to sort of touch base on today. It's not necessary that the commentary or any kind of explanation that I've been able to portray applies not only to Tara, but it is to Chenrezig, it is to the Sempa, Manjushri, or any practice. It doesn't matter which deity. The whole, as I said, it's the template of the Vajrayana. It follows the same structure. Meanings and what it symbolizes and the significant characteristics of the deities representing the inherent quality of one's own mind, that may be a little bit distinct. The activities may be a little bit distinct. But other than that, the whole relationship to the deity practice must be seen in that way. So it is with the hope that many of you who are fortunate in having received so many wonderful teachings from many teachers will be able to carry that and understand there is really no time to waste, so much distraction, so many different obstacles to the path of enlightenment, and that invoking the blessings of Tara as well as all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, hopefully in whatever remaining time you and I have left in our lives, we will be able to intrinsically find the Buddha inherent of each one of our souls. So with that, I will stop here and take some time to finish with the Wangru, and then work after that with the walk. I'm not so sure what time it is supposed to be.
3:45.
Oh, so I'll stop here for a moment. 저는 이제 감시에서 online 이제 그런 감시 제가 감시 받고 세대에서